Hello, everyone. Welcome back to StatTech Research's seminar series on measuring progress and well-being. I'm Kelsey O'Connor, one of the organizers. Today, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Peter Benczur to the series, who will speak about the European Commission's Sustainable and Inclusive Well-being Initiative. Before we get started, a brief update on our third annual Measuring Progress workshop, taking place this 18th and 19th of June. We are currently reviewing the abstracts, which is actually proving to be fun but difficult as we received a great number of very interesting ones. Ultimately, this year should turn out to be another great one, so excited for that. The accepted authors will be notified by the end of the month. Back to today, Peter will speak for around 40 minutes and then address questions at the end, at which time please raise your virtual hands or post your questions in the chat. During the presentation, please keep your microphones muted. And as a last reminder, we are recording the event. You'll be able to find this and past recordings on our website and YouTube channel. Now to introduce Dr. Peter Benczur. Peter is a scientific officer at the European Commission's Joint Research Center, also known as the JRC. He is one of the coordinators of the Sustainable and Inclusive Wellbeing Commission initiative, aiming to develop metrics to complement GDP. He was one of the developers of the JRC's conceptual framework of resilience and the resilience dashboards. He studied mathematics at the Laurent Eötvös University in Budapest and obtained a PhD in economics at MIT in 2001. Before joining the JRC in 2013, he was the head of research at the Central Bank of Hungary and an adjunct faculty at the Central European University, Budapest. It is a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Peter Benczur. Without further ado, Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy for the opportunity to be in this online seminar or webinar, and I don't see all the participants because when you share the screen, you're disadvantaged. But it's great to have the opportunity to actually have a conversation about this initiative, because this is not a final product. This is more a journey than an end status. So if there are something very pressing, then feel free to stop me. But otherwise, probably it's much better also for the sake of time to have the conversation, the discussion at the end. So I want to talk about this Commission initiative on sustainable and inclusive well-being, formerly Beyond GDP. I'll explain why we are talking about sustainable and inclusive well-being in the Beyond GDP domain. And before starting the content, on the one hand, this is not an official Commission position, and on the other hand, I'm presenting alone, but the work builds on the involvement of many current and previous colleagues and contributors, and also some other colleagues who gave important insights or pushes for this initiative. You can see their names here. Okay, so talking about the policy context, talking about where this is coming from. It started more or less with the 2020 Strategic Foresight Report, the first of the kind of the European Commission, which on the one hand was talking about resilience. So we got involved for the resilience topic, but already then it started to talk about the fact that measuring and monitoring resilience should feed into an integrated approach to measure people's well-being. This was already in 2020. Then the next edition, 2021, which introduced our measurement tools, the resilience dashboards. We're painting the resilience dashboards as an important step towards a more integrated approach for measuring well-being beyond GDP. And then basically we got the mandate to launch this initiative. We formed in 2023 a formal inter-service working group and sort of internal committee within the Commission to develop this concept. The work was officially announced in the 2023 Strategic Foresight Report that the Commission has launched internal work, building on past work, of course, to develop sustainable inclusive well-being metrics for the EU to complement GDP. You may remember 2023 was a sort of a heyday of these initiatives with the Beyond Growth conference more or less at the same time in the European Parliament. And fast forwarding by 2025, so the first Strategic Foresight Report of the new Commission, which was released in September 2025, there was a mention, or there was an acknowledgement that indeed this work has led to outputs which are ready to be used. It's more, unfortunately, an imperative than a statement, but ready to be used for policy evaluation and the assessment of investment and reform decisions. And it called for further collaboration with the OECD, the UN, especially eyeing the Sustainable Development Goals agenda and the then foreseen work of the UN high-level expert group. So what was this initiative about? It had two broad work tracks. The main idea was to identify and develop emerging avenues for beyond GDP or sustainable inclusive well-being metrics. So one was a two-tiered sustainable inclusive well-being dashboard, one which should be a medium-sized, medium meaning still more than 100, which should be a balanced and comprehensive list to assess a country's progress in broad terms. But for simpler, for communication and visualization purposes, also a small dashboard and potential headlines, which would be important, especially for communication and broader public engagement. At the same time, there was a major interest in developing augmented GDP type measures. I'll explain what these are. They are basically monetary measures which try to go beyond the usual boundaries of GDP measurement, and some more specific work tracks like developing new indicators, both statistical and model-based, to bridge identified gaps. These were, for example, spillover effects beyond borders. So how the well-being of one country is affecting in a positive or negative way the well-being of another. Planetary boundaries, where to have country-level indicators, broad indicators, to somehow harmonize them with for example, natural capital accounting. That's a challenge, and also we identified that social capital and cohesion are elements where, or are areas where indicators are not as readily available. To develop integrated assessment models which bridge the social, the economic, and the environmental domain, especially for policymaking, scenario analysis, projections, conditional projections, sort of quantitative foresight, and also to reassess methodologies and to work on making beyond GDP indicators more timely. Because often in the environmental and the social domain, you have lagged values, and you also have, even in the best case, with some exceptions, annual values, while GDP is more timely and is available at a higher frequency, typically quarterly. These were the main steps we were trying to do. So this inter-service working group first started to think about the conceptualization, what we want to do for measuring well-being beyond GDP, and our preliminary concept was sustainable and inclusive well-being, identified as the well-being of all people, of current and the future generations, and of the planet. And then, with this in mind, we started to head towards a multidimensional conceptual or measurement framework, drawing strongly on the OECD framework with some differences, which I will explain later a bit further. But maybe it's interesting and indicative to explain and to look at this visualization which we try to put together. So starting from the middle. The core is the balance between well-being today and well-being tomorrow, where well-being today should be interpreted in a broad multidimensional sense. And the link between well-being today and tomorrow is essentially sustainability, which has two main parts. One is to One is to leave resources, set aside resources for the future, essentially the capitals. And the other is resilience, which is the ability that despite various challenges, despite various positive or negative major trends, these resources should reach the future generations, and that future generations should be able to use them despite potential challenges and difficulties. So this is the role of resilience. Sustainability has this social and economic component. The capitals, the challenges, and the necessary resilience, where the challenges are the sustainability transition, shocks and trends, potential feedback loops. And there is also the links with nature. The links with nature can be positive or negative because there are impacts of our activities on nature. Unfortunately, typically negative, the way we contribute to the planetary pressures. There are contributions of nature to our well-being, but there are also challenges like climate change or climate or weather related disasters that come from nature to our well-being. And the entire framework is intentionally then framed as the donuts. So nature is around. Nature is an embedding ingredient from which we are, or of which we are a part. So an important remark here indeed is this notion of sustainable inclusive well-being seems to be an emerging new consensus. When we started to sort of put this term together in 2022, independently, but we were not the only ones. The group which then became the Vice Horizons Horizon Research Consortia already started to talk about this. What I put here is their Vice Triangle, which tried to see if practically all existing Beyond GDP frameworks have aspects of well-being, inclusion, sustainability, or typically 2 or even 3 of them. But one can then think of the Merge Horizon Consortium, which wants to look for policy pathways to sustainable and inclusive well-being. The recent closing conference of the SPES N2B Horizon Consortium, which again was saying placing sustainable and inclusive well-being at the heart of the economy. The UN Network of Economic Statisticians is planning to create a framework for inclusive and sustainable well-being, and also sort of to complete the architecture of the systems by working or proposing a third pillar, the system of population and social accounts. And also by now, even the UN high-level expert group is talking about a dashboard of inclusive, equitable, and sustainable well-being indicators. So really, this term seems to be a new common ground for many practitioners of Beyond GDP. This is more or less the measurement structure or the structure of our framework, indeed closely resembling the OECD. I don't want to go into the specific dimensions like within well-being today. We have the usual multidimensional ingredients. In sustainability, we have the blue part, which is the social and economic parts, divided by the resources for future well-being and resilience. We have then well-being tomorrow, which is more of a placeholder for imagined model-based projections of selected indicators. So that's not a statistical domain, but conceptually it's there. Then we have nature, which we moved out deliberately from one of the capitals to indicate its role beyond just being a resource for us. And we added their planetary boundaries. Inclusiveness, which includes also the spillover effects. We made that a sort of a transversal foundational ingredient, and we also brought in institutional capacity and quality. Another ingredient of this emerging consensus is a recent paper. Probably many of you have seen it. It was led by Ida Kubiszewski and Bob Constanza on sort of building consensus on societal well-being, which was essentially doing a semantic analysis or text-based analysis on more than 100 Beyond GDP frameworks, trying to understand whether there is a core of the structure of the dimensions of the components of these frameworks. And the finding was that with 10 or ideally with 20 such components, such dimensions, which you see on the right, you get quite much similarity. You are capturing the essence of most of these frameworks. Now, if you look at those, they are actually, with some exceptions, which are important to think about, but they are very close also to our structure. So there is much more similarity across the very scattered Beyond GDP existing frameworks than one would think. So that's another hope for a convergence and a more united voice of this field. So back to our work, what we started to do is first we collected more than 20 EU and a couple of global indicator frameworks and try to see how they relate, how they map into this structure of our sustainable and inclusive well-being framework, partly to understand how comprehensive these other frameworks, how balanced these other frameworks are. And the conclusion was, here I'm showing only some selected indicators, actually the more comprehensive ones, that maybe with the exception of the EU SDG list, these frameworks are more sectoral. They are good in capturing one or two components, but not all of them. Even the SDGs with the EU list with the around 100 indicators, they are not entering into the institutional domain. They have some gaps in inclusiveness, social capital. So there is still scope to unite these frameworks. So then we use the very same more than 20 frameworks and put their indicators. That is this gigantic number of more than 1,000 indicators, from which, okay, there is a lot of overlap. So after you eliminate the duplications or the near duplication, you still have almost 500 indicators. And then we created, and this is our online prioritization tool, which we used in our inter-service working group. In at least 2 rounds, we forced our participants to say which indicators they believe are more important from a policy perspective, from representing, capturing the important concepts for a given component or dimension of sustainable and inclusive well-being, which is part of existing top priority frameworks or top priority policy frameworks. This way, we managed to get to 152. Then by looking at data availability, quality, the frequency, and so on, we managed to get first this comprehensive dashboard of 140 indicators. And since that's still way too many, we try to go to the magic 20, like what the UN high-level expert group is trying to do. We couldn't get below 50. Already the 50 was sort of the borderline compromise, which still kept all participants aligned. It's still too many. So we decided to create also synthetic measures, sort of composite indicators for the components, which are then only 6, 7. So you can get a quick overview of how things are, but still you're not losing the underlying diversity and multidimensionality. You can always open up the synthetics and see which indicators are driving in which direction. 2 important features of this list of 50, which have been actually underlined by many observers, is one, they can be viewed as a sort of a synthesis and summary of all these more than 20 existing frameworks of EU policies, which means that if you need a starting list, this is something which has already synthesized and scrutinized all those existing frameworks. So this can serve as a useful starting point. Moreover, this has some minimum buy-in, some minimum consensus of almost every policy DG from the Commission, which again means that this is a list which has some shared support. Again, making it useful as a starting point. Just to give a sense, I don't want to go into details of what indicators we were using. None of them were really surprising. So they are typically the usual suspects, maybe with some exceptions, especially in the resilience domain. You can see this list, but also in the links in the presentation, you can access the reports which contain the full list and documentation. So looking at the results first, this is our usual sort of colored carpet for a given year. This shows not the indicators, but only the component level measures in a color coding. So dark orange is the not so good performance, not so good situation. It's the bottom 12.5%. Deep blue is the top 12.5%. So that is at the top of the distribution, and then the other colors are in the middle. What I mean by the distribution, so the way this is colored is for every indicator, we look at the entire period of 2011 to 2023. We pool all country values. It's hundreds of observations, and then we find every country year values position in this percentile rank, and then we basically take the median of these values to come up with the color of these components. So basically, if something is dark blue, it means that the indicators in that components tend to be in the top 12.5% of the multi-year distribution of these measures. Now we're considering also to look at the multi-year min-max transformation. We did that in a global variant, and the results are fairly comparable. So we may switch methodology, but right now this is this one. So what we see in this colored carpet, that on the one hand, GDP, because countries are ordered according to their GDP per capita position, is not totally unrelated from sustainable and inclusive well-being. You see more blue on towards the right and more orange on the left, but it's not the same on the one hand. On the other hand, within the components, there is quite some heterogeneity. So some countries are relatively better in well-being today, but not so good in resources for the future or nature, or the way around. So the multidimensionality really shows up, and then you may see even more heterogeneity when you open up the components and you look at the indicator levels. An interesting positive outlier is, I would say, Slovenia, who is light blue, so on the strong end for the overall sustainable and inclusive well-being measures, also for well-being today, while based on its just GDP position, you would have expected something lower, something weaker, and you can find other similar cases and examples as well. An important feature of our methodology is it allows a consistent assessment of processes over time. So if value is a percentile of a given country in a given year is better than another one in another year, it also means that the underlying measure has improved, which is not always the case for composites, because if you're normalizing only within a given year, then across years you cannot really compare the values. So this is not the case here. So what I'm showing is GDP was improving in the EU from 2011 to 2023, with of course the dent of the COVID episode. Well-being today, the blue dashed line, was also improving. Actually, it improved much more in percentile terms, and the overall sustainable and inclusive well-being was also improving, still a bit more than GDP itself. And all of them were subject to some reversal, but then recovery after COVID. One can look at the same across countries or at further components. Another interesting application is you can look at the trade-offs between different components. So something which I'm plotting here, and not by chance, is how the well-being today scores or indices relate to the resources for the future. Whenever a country is above the 45-degree or the regression line, which is more or less the same, it means that they are relatively stronger in resources for the future than current well-being. So they have a stronger future orientation. Whenever they're below, they have a stronger present orientation, which is relating strongly to intergenerational fairness. If we are devoting too much of our resources to today as opposed to future, that may signal problems for the future generations. The Commission's intergenerational fairness strategy is coming out today or tomorrow, so it's again not a by chance link between the two. And the last illustration is you can also look at countries. Being in Italy, we looked at Italy. You can do two broad things. You can compare a country in a given year to the EU values. This is what you see on the left, which in which components is a given country like Italy stronger or weaker, or better positioned or worse positioned than the EU. And you can compare over the same country over time. So here, this is Italy in 2011, the light blue, and Italy in 2023, the dark blue, to see the improvements in some components more, in some components less. Before talking about single, especially monetary measures, very briefly, another EU initiative that is older actually than our work on sustainable and inclusive well-being, the EU's Regional Social Progress Index, which is championed by DG Regio. It's a sort of special edition of the Social Progress Index, which enables regional and by now even local or community level extension. It relies heavily on Gallup data, lot more individual perceptions with its advantages and disadvantages. I put here the three main components and dimensions. And indeed, the regional dimension is important, not in all countries, but in many countries, you see that there is a notable within country heterogeneity. So the regional dimension matters substantially. So talking about this, what I call the quest for single numbers, not only of the European Commission, but clearly, and I put here a quote from the very first, the 2009 European Commission communication on Beyond GDP, which was saying that indicators that summarize important issues with a single figure are essential communication tools. The 2023 Strategic Foresight Report also confirmed the similar interest by policymakers. It was even foreseeing and actually was pushing us very strongly to identify methodologies to augment or adjust GDP in a monetary terms for aspects of well-being or sustainability. Not an easy and not uncontested territory. But let me a bit just jump back in history to say why this quest for a single number is that much, or it has been this long with us. So GDP is a single number, but it's not only a single number; it's the top number of the system of national accounts, which is an internationally agreed standard set of recommendations of how to compile broad measures of economic activity, from flows of income, from production by various sectors, and final use of production. So it's an entire ecosystem with a top-level indicator. The development started in 1934, pioneering work of Simon Kuznets. The actual first institutionalized version was created in 1953, more based on the work of Richard Stone and the British approach than the original Kuznets one. But the magic moment, and here I'm largely standing actually on the shoulders of Enrico Giovannini. This is his usual argumentation. The main moment was the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944, where there was a choice between these two approaches. One is more households, a bit well-being focused, and the other, the British approach focusing on production. And the argument in this The Power of a Single Number book laid out is that this was a political choice, And the reason for choosing the production-based approach was to have a number which shows that the West is not inferior to the East if you measure production properly, or if we aggregate production properly, or a bit blunter put, if you want to see which camp is able to produce more stuff. So GDP has this political importance, this political mandate. It's a single number, but it's a single number with an underlying ecosystem. So at least in my personal opinion, the ideal Beyond GDP number should be also having a Beyond SNA type feature, that it's not just one single number, but it's one single number which enables a similar breakdown as the system of national accounts. How is this political quest doing these days? I try to collect here some evidence that it's very well and alive, that there is, again, strong political interest in finding numbers which compare actually the performance of different countries or different economic models and economic regimes. There is this very widely held view that the economic center of gravity is moving from the West and the center to the East. In the 2021 Strategic Foresight Report, there was this flag figure where the flags are the different entities. This size shows their share from nominal GDP of the given year. And you see that from 1990, EU was the biggest, US was a bit smaller, the rest of the world was much smaller. By 2019, US took over, China is not yet as large as the EU, but getting there. And according to some projections, by 2050, the EU is shrinking. The US is clearly bigger than the EU, but China is even bigger, and India is almost the same. So the question was, would this look different if it was not just nominal GDP, but it was a measure which takes broader aspects of the quality of life or the environment into account? There is the same case for competitiveness, the Draghi report, which says that, oh, in GDP terms and in productivity terms, the US is doing better. But is it also true if we take a broader perspective? In particular, and this is an argument which I will then develop further, is can we get a directionality for competitiveness from sustainable and inclusive well-being? In particular, one should use competitiveness should be about using resources to deliver well-being to people in a sustainable and inclusive way. And we need to take into account that some resources are devoted to things which are not measured in GDP, but the resources are measured in the costs. So a pure GDP-based productivity or competitiveness measure can be missing these aspects. And the last quote which I put there is a recent quote from one of the previous prime ministers of Hungary, who was pointing to this sort of reopened competition between the economic models of which economic model is more suitable to increase the well-being of a nation perspective and providing security. Is it the European model, the American model, or the Chinese model? More or less, these are the three main contenders. So these are some illustrations. The left is what we put into the 2023 Strategic Foresight Report. It's a health-adjusted GDP or health-adjusted income measure using the methodology of Mark Fleurbe, which shows that if you mix in a monetary way GDP and life expectancy, indeed the EU looks a bit better because the adjustment is in relative terms the biggest for the EU. The gap relative to the US is closing a bit. The per capita gap remains, of course, relative to India and China. And if you were to look at growth rates, which you cannot derive directly from these numbers, but you would see is that the adjusted growth rates are higher than the unadjusted growth rates. The EU growth rate is better than that of the US, but of course, India and China are showing an even bigger improvement because it's their income and also their life expectancy, which is improving. On the right, I put an extension, which was done recently by one of my close colleagues, Sean Da Costa, which took one step further. So it's a combination of well, it's not GDP, but household income, life expectancy, the inequality or the dispersion of life expectancy, and the dispersion or inequality of income. And what we see is as we move from the dark blue, which is only income, of the EU-US across the many years, the more we start to bring in, and eventually when we go to the right to this, I don't know, peach-colored column, which does all the adjustments, actually you get the reverse of the comparison. So income terms, US is higher and has been mostly growing. Very broadly adjusted income terms with these three factors, actually the US is stagnant, the EU is still growing, and the relative comparison changes. Now this may depend on the degree of inequality aversion, which is a critical parameter, but it already shows that you can do a lot in this comparison by applying different methodologies. And for curiosity, I put here two quotes from the interim report of the UN high-level expert group, because they also intend to develop. It's, I think, still an ongoing discussion. Some adjusted GDP measures, this eGDP, that's for the distribution adjustment. That's very similar than the one which you see on the right. They also have something which they call SGDP, which is for typically environmental externalities. That's something which I can briefly show here, though I don't want to go into details, so probably I'll just run really through this slide. So there are methodologies, there are model-based assessments of the with which you can adjust GDP for GHG emissions, which is one of the first items everybody would like to see. The idea is very simple. If you have some sort of a social cost of carbon emissions, then you take GDP, or ideally you take net national income, and you just deduct the negative price times GHG emissions. This is the social cost of carbon, which you can obtain from various integrated assessment models. The idea is simple. The results are interesting. That specific method is highly contested. There is one preferred alternative called the shadow price of carbon. I don't want to go into details, but for example, France even have their own agreed national time series for the shadow price of carbon, and their statistical office, INCA, is releasing official, though still experimental, carbon augmented national counts on a regular basis. So what you can do with this is actually show that if you take carbon emissions into account, this adjusted growth rate is actually bigger than the unadjusted growth rate. So the statement that, oh, green policies, climate policies are a drag on the economy, once you add things properly together, is not necessarily true. Two further illustrations, and these are already actually augmented productivity measures. The left is from the UK Statistics Office, the ONS, using their gross inclusive income and net inclusive income measure. And the right is from a recent academic research paper. So what we see on the left is productivity of gross value added of the inclusive income or inclusive gross value added and inclusive net value added. And the dynamics of this productivity measure until 2017, more or less, is very different than the productivity developments of the normal gross value added, market gross value added. And the biggest item which drives this difference is actually the way they incorporate carbon adjustment. So this is a case that the UK was sort of producing a bit more expensively, but reducing GHG emissions massively. If you don't take that into account, your productivity measures will be relatively flat. If you do take into account, your productivity will be looking much better. And you see the same more or less for the US, that there was a notable productivity slowdown around, I don't know, 2004 to more or less 2010, together with a reduction in GHG emissions. And again, if you bring in increasingly high levels of the social cost of carbon, then you can flatten out this productivity decline. So again, if you measure more properly the outputs for which you're using your inputs, you can get a very different assessment of your productivity. So some very last slides is back to this tracking the EU sustainability transition and its performance in a global comparison, one of the tasks from the 2020 Strategic Foresight Report, comparing the EU versus the US for 2010-2023. On the left, this is GDP. This is more or less what we know, that starting from the same level, US grew faster. Here, I just repeated the figure of my colleague from previous. Here I put life satisfaction, calculating the population weighted value for the EU, where we see that the usual advantage of the US has almost completely disappeared. On the right, unfortunately, I had to cover the ultimate results because they are under finalization now. We extended our EU dashboard to more or less an OECD setup. And what, if I removed these tiles, what you would see is that, again, both the dynamics and the level of the well-being today and the sustainable inclusive well-being measure would be higher and would be growing faster in the EU than in the US. So the statement that the US is superior in terms of producing things, that may be true, but in terms of producing well-being in a sustainable and inclusive way, that is not necessarily the case. And I put here two recent speeches by top executives of the ECB who were following a very similar argumentation, that if you look at, and they were even citing very similar indicators, which I will be showing on my last slide, that if you compare EU and the US from a well-being perspective, we have a lot to be proud of. We also have challenges. So what I'm showing here, because this I can show, not yet the summary measures, but the underlying indicators, is all the 9 indicators of the current well-being component. Red is always the US, blue is the EU. The scales are such that whenever something goes up, that means an improvement. And the orders of magnitudes more or less mean the same. It's a percentile improvement across all charts. So household income, no surprise, that's better in the US. Employment, better, but not that much anymore. Actually, around COVID, there was even a slight reversal. And maybe surprisingly, this UHC service coverage index, which is a universal healthcare service coverage index, is higher in the US. That's surprising, but I checked twice. This is an SDG indicator, and indeed, this is like that. It's not about the funding, it's really about the availability of some services. But in every other respects, the EU is better and is improving more. The advantage of not just having a random selection of such indicators, but coming from a framework is that you are also forced to find those areas where the EU has challenges. Or the income was here, but if I've shown the resources for the future, the investment and the capitals, there you would see that in many indicators the situation is different, and the US is relatively better in resources for the future. So this framework can identify the strengths, but also the weaknesses. Thank you very much. I stop here. And I'm more than happy to have a conversation. I don't know, should I share? I stop sharing, and then if there is a need, I can share again.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. I think that's a good idea. Please, anyone, you can raise your virtual hands or write in the chat to ask a question, although I encourage you to raise your hand. And then just be brief. That way we have plenty of time for everyone to ask questions. And I think I might start, Peter. So a quick clarifying question. So there is a overall social and inclusive well-being index. And I imagine it's based on those 7 dimensions or domains. Are there equal weights, or how did you choose to do that? Just a kind of a detailed question.
How should we proceed? Should we collect some questions, or if I can, I can answer quickly, but maybe.
Yeah, I think we have we have 3 questions, so perhaps we can collect. Well, we may be able to move quickly enough. Let's just try to everybody keep their questions quick and your response quick, and then I think we can move
Okay, so
one by one.
then I answer directly, and then we move to the next one. So the overall index is the same median of all the 50 indicators, which means that it's not directly based on the components. In the alternative methodology, which we are contemplating to switch to, it would be probably the average of the components, the unweighted average of the components, meaning that every component would have the same importance. We tried, and in this global comparison, this global extension, the results looked very similar. So it seemed not to matter too much. But this is you have a couple of choices.
And you have an equal number of components per dimension?
No. So here the reason why we chose the overall index to be the unweighted average of the 50, because the way we selected the indicators was to balance the underlying subdimensions. So in a sense, if a component has more indicators, that's because that's more complex and more things need to be taken into account. So that was a sort of an implicit importance weighting, which you can agree or disagree with. So right now, component with more indicators gets de facto a bigger weight. We, in an alternative, may be getting moving away from that methodology, and then we'll see how much it changes some of the comparisons. So far, it seems that the broad conclusions remain quite stable.
Okay, great, thanks. Chris, I saw you were asking a question, but we'll go Sama, and then Francesco, and we will come back. Yeah, Sama.
Thank you very much, and thanks, Peter, for the great presentation. So a few very quick questions. One, I remember from your graph when you showed the trend over time that the index goes down in 2020, but it also peaks really high in 2019. And I'm just wondering if you've kind of explored that. I can see that it might be to do with the resources for the future, but I'm just wondering if you're able to explain that a little bit. Then I guess a question which maybe this is a bit of a devil's advocate question. The overall the different components all do show very different patterns to GDP, but the overall index does actually correlate quite highly, at least on the graph that you showed. I'm just wondering, do you have a kind of a theoretical explanation for that? Is there some way of kind of understanding why the different components maybe differ, but when you put them all together, they correlate quite close to GDP? And then a last point just about the US comparison, which you're doing at the end. I'm just wondering, I can see how when you look at sustainable inclusive well-being, I'm kind of not surprised at all that the EU does better than the US. I'm curious, is there a way of also doing a kind of a US media friendly version of that, whereby you include things that US people, that the US public generally cares about? Because I think maybe like if you put sustainability in there, then I imagine a lot of people will be like, well, yeah, who cares? So I'm just wondering, is there a maybe a narrower set of components that you might include in there and still show that the EU is doing better?
So the 2019 peak, I cannot reply with the details on top of my head, but we did look into it of what variables caused the that early peak, and I would say that's an interplay of a couple of, I mean, not very strong stories. So whenever you have indices, you always have some peculiarities. I don't think there was a major story, although there was a trend and an overall improving before, and 2019 was indeed sort of the end of a end of a set of golden years. So it's not surprised that 2019 was high, but that particular jump was, I think, driven by the interplay of some not necessarily very strong story factors. It's a good point to see how GDP correlates with the components and overall SIWB, and why it's stronger with the overall SIWB. I don't yet have an answer to that. I don't want to speculate, but I do have an answer to the last question. So the EU-US comparison, the biggest difference is actually not in the environment. The biggest difference is in those 9 variables which I was showing, which is current well-being. And I don't think that for most of them there would be a strong argument that this is only interesting for us. The second one is inequality. There you may argue that for the US it matters less, but for the current well-being, I think these are relatively uncontested ingredients.
Part of that, Peter, is is how to communicate it to the Americans. So it's if you call it sustainable and inclusive, they're just going to turn off the television. But if you call it well-being by itself, you call it the Europeans' view of well-being, or even if you call it the Europeans' view, they might turn off the television. So you have to call it something different, maybe. I don't know if you have a view on that.
Certainly, it's a valid point. I don't have a good answer. At the same time, so the question is, do we want to convince them or do we want to convince ourselves? Right now, our objective is a bit more to restore the confidence of people in Europe, people in the EU, that no, we are not inferior. No, we are not the ones who will be subject to civilizational erasure.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
As a first step, we may want to boost ourselves. Then it's important, and if we can do both at the same time, would be even better. But there, the terms well-being, inclusive. No, I know inclusive is almost a 4-letter word in a big part of the US now. So it's not easy to have such a US friendly framing of this.
Yeah, what you say makes sense. Chris, did you want to go?
Maybe, Peter, did you tell us why this spillovers dimension was inversely related to GDP across countries?
So I wouldn't read too much into that at this point, because that's unfortunately a very poorly measured thing. The variable we used is a spillover index score, which has been developed recently and is available for a single year. So it's not very it's not very robust, I would say, how it relates over years. But the general idea is, if it's mostly the spillovers from trade, from embedded in imports, then richer countries are doing more of it. The richer countries are I don't know, pushing their negative consequences more to other countries. So therefore, there is not a mechanical, but I think a sort of natural negative correlation, that the richer you are, the more you are doing it on the expense of pushing some of your costs, or a big part of your costs outside. But I think it's too early to make this conclusion in a very strong way.
That's rather helpful. It leads into a question I had, another one. But please feel free to raise your hand, everyone, or write in the chat if you have a question. We have one from Nike. Are there any calls for proposals or horizon in this research area? So I guess this is a fairly general question.
There used to be. There was a moment when like 4 almost parallel horizon consortia have been formed: Vice Horizons, PAS2B, and Visor. I think Statak is member of Visor. They came from the same, and then there was merge, which was a how it's called. It's essentially a synthesis, which is not really about doing new research, but more putting the dots together and exploring the policy use. Then there were some like maps on modeling, some on social investment, but in the recent calls, maybe there is some on intergenerational fairness, but it's less and less. Then maybe in 2 years' time there will be a wave again. But now I think we are we're in the wrong part of the movement of the priorities.
Francesco, please feel free.
Thanks a lot. Indeed, it's Chiara, because you and Samai have asked my 2 questions, so now I'm dry. So Chiara,
Yeah, I wanted to ask how do you measure these 2-dimension spillovers, a bit more details on how you mention these spillovers and institutions. Because it seems to me that maybe the way you actually measure this dimension might make a difference might affect your result. One issue that I'm worried is that you mentioned the fact that, for example, elements that we do not measure in our GDP are contributing to societal well-being, and you refer to unpaid domestic work. But I'm afraid I don't see in any way how unpaid domestic work can contribute to societal well-being. Especially, I'm thinking in certain countries in Europe where home care are terribly, and there is evidence, anecdotal evidence and more that tells us that basically carers have terrible lives. So yeah, that's my question basically. And also one thing that I noticed is this cleavage between your overall index and our well-being today. So well-being today is increasing. I think this is related to some question. And your index is basically seems to have a flat trend since 2016 onwards.
It might help, Peter, if you bring your slides back for the...
I'm moving there.
Thanks.
And coming back to share. So for SIWB, which is the red, there was indeed this 2019 peak. We have not yet gotten back to the 2019 peak, but if we look at relative to 2011, the overall trend is not as strong as current well-being, but it's still increasing. So I think
we're not seeing your slides. Sorry, Peter. If you
really?
want to share, yeah.
No, because in Teams you have to click once. For for WebEx you need to click twice. Okay, so red is the overall index apart from the 2019 peak, which we have not yet reached again, but the overall trend is still increasing, not as strongly as the black line, which is the current well-being, but still stronger because here it can be a bit misleading. So the thing to compare for GDP is not the orange line but the blue line, because the blue line is GDP using the same normalization as the other measure. So it's the GDP improved from the 57th percentile to the 64th, and the red and the black improved much more than that of GDP. So I think also the overall well-being index, the SIWB index, has been improving. The measurement of spillovers, it's a specific variable we took from, I never remember I think it's the it's an organization developing sustainable development measures, including this international spillover index, which summarizes, I don't know, like more than 10 different aspects of positive and negative spillovers through trade and through other things. So it's I cannot defend or justify their measure. We took it as granted, and maybe better measure could be, and that exists, but not in good enough form. Is, for example, the carbon content of imports. Which is a very specific measure. I don't know what that would show. but I think that would also be related. The measurement of institutions, we use the Worldwide Governance Indicators database, which has 6, and just very simply we took the average, but those are all those are very strongly correlated. So I think if you use one or the other, or you used all 6, you would see more or less the same trends. And the issue of unpaid domestic work. So the in our framework, we did not include unpaid domestic work. It came up as one of leading items with which you actually can go beyond GDP. This is what the UK ONS did. They took the satellite accounts and added the value of unpaid domestic work. Now, I certainly don't want to argue that the situation of those who are the laborers of this unpaid domestic work is good, not even in the EU countries, let alone in the global south. But I believe that having a measure of their contribution, and actually what the UK ONS found is that this is comparable to market GVA. It means that that's a huge resource we should not overlook. I think it's to me it should be used as a reinforcement of their importance of the typically women who are doing this. So it's not necessarily from a well-being perspective, but from a, again, measuring better what we produce, because this is produced by resources and by people and by people's time. So this is where I see also the unpaid domestic work as corresponding or aligning with the argumentation. But I don't disagree with with its I don't know, negative aspects.
Thank you, Peter. So we are after time, and we have one question. So perhaps we'll end with Enrico's question. Enrico, you can feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, Peter. Thanks a lot for the presentation. I was wondering if and how your framework of sustainable and inclusive well-being relate with the conceptual framework that is in development by the UN high-level expert group on Beyond GDP. And because they look pretty similar, but the devil is in the details. And what is your plan, if there is any plan for like alignment when the work of the high-level expert group will be published? Thank you very much.
So at the top level, I think there is alignment in terms of emphasizing well-being, emphasizing inclusiveness / equitability, and emphasizing sustainability. If you look at least the interim report, the structure they revealed there, they didn't say that that's the breakdown of current well-being. If I interpret it as current well-being, that's very similar to what I was showing for current well-being. Then they say they want to look at nature. So not the interim report, but for example, the early January presentation and the slides for nature. It's, I think, again, very, very similar to the kind of things we try to do. For inclusiveness, they may not come up with the dashboard, but maybe more the breakdowns of all their indicators in the in their general well-being domain. So the biggest potential question or discrepancy can be is whether they create composites or not, and whether they create composites only for the current well-being domain or also beyond. There is also parallel in the augmented or adjusted GDP measures. I'm very curious to see what they eventually manage to agree on. And something which I wanted to highlight when I was showing the EU-US comparison, I think that's a nice point. Is there deliberately I put the 3 main contenders for overall top-level measures, which is an augmented monetary measure, subjective well-being, and a composite from a dashboard. This is the same 3 things which the high-level expert group is considering, and to me, that slide show that you get very similar reinforcing messages of the 3 methodologies. So in a sense, you don't need to choose between them. You can use all 3, and they will have strengths and weaknesses, but they will convey more or less a similar message. So I expect that if something comes out from the high-level expert group that can, I don't know, lead to a more internal standardization and further simplification also for our framework. So that would be an input for our next steps. But I think it's far from from clear what they will be able to produce and what the General Assembly will eventually endorse.
Peter, that's very helpful. And maybe one last tiny question, perhaps. Do you have an opinion on using subjective well-being as a single indicator, a single headline indicator? It sounds like maybe that's feasible.
I know that on this there are very I don't know polarized opinions among the Beyond GDP practitioners. I try to be somewhere in the middle. So to me, this is a very useful summary top-level measure with strengths and weaknesses. I see, for example, especially the methodology, if employed seriously, of Mark Fleurbe, which uses subjective well-being to actually to identify the trade-offs between the non-monetary and the monetary aspects. But at the individual level, I see there again subjective well-being as being the core anchor. But I know that there are, I don't know, strong arguments both pro and con for how comparable it is over time across countries. I know that for every doubt there are 10 reassuring and 10 doubting papers. So to me, this should be one, but maybe not the only one of summary measures. But that's more my personal view and not any, certainly not the official Commission position.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. That's very helpful. If you have any closing remarks for us, otherwise we'll shut it down. Thank you for your nice presentation.
I can just only be thankful again for the opportunity and for the questions. And I couldn't monitor the chat, so if there were any unresolved questions there, feel free to reach out to me. I'm no longer sharing, but if you Google my name, or there was I think at the end of the slides, which are available in the recording, functional mailbox where we can be reached. So the main idea is to have a conversation. This is not a final product. This is a journey.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Peter. Great seeing you.
Bye bye.